Kia ora, Steve. Nor America oku tipuna, ko tararua, ko ruahini na pai, monga e manaki ana ia o, ko manawatu ta'awa, ke te papaioia aho e noho ana, ko Cami Sawyer tokoingwa. So I'm Cami Sawyer with the Ministry of Education, and I live in Palmerston North, which I love. Very nice to be in this beautiful place. I've been with the ministry for a few months, so not really long term. Before that, I worked at Massey University and before teaching mathematics, and before that, I taught high school maths and stats in the Manawatu region. And before that, I came from America. I'm in the secondary tertiary team at the ministry and working with this implementation of the new NCEA. So thank you so much for coming today. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michael and Sunny, for arranging this big day. Thank you, Robin, for hosting. I hope you guys have had an exciting day and go away feeling charged and with lots of new ideas. I know the sessions that I got a chance to pop into had really great things to think about. My objectives is kind of around helping you get to know me and my work at the ministry, and to give you an update and clarify your understanding of the review of NCEA. The session's organized around your questions, so it was really nice of the organizers to ask those questions as you registered, or ask you to ask those questions. So if you submitted a question, hopefully you'll see it on the screen today. Please post any further Patai in the chat, and Robin will be keeping, or somebody will be keeping an eye on that and let me know, and we'll cover those at the end. So I've taken all the questions that were asked and grouped them into sections, your Patai, and the very first set was around the NCEA change. So these were the questions that were asked. The key thing to remember is the principles around the NCEA change: well-being, equity and inclusion, coherence, pathways, and credibility. The ministry had a huge review. It's part of an ongoing review of NCEA to look at the work, and the minister asked that they do look further into it, and they did one of the largest kind of data gathering, meeting with people to look and see what was going on and how people were looking at NCEA, and to really look into those unintended consequences. They had over 16,000 points of engagement that were used to develop these principles. The 7 key changes that came out of those meetings and came out of the principles are listed here. And what I'd like you to do is think a little bit about those. Hopefully you've seen those before. And Robin, if you'll put the Jamboard link in the chat, I'm going to ask you to go off to Jamboard and vote, or just put a mark by one of the ones that is the one that you think kind of makes the most difference to you. So the Jamboard link is in the chat now. Sorry, as people are still entering the room, we might have to repost that. So when you get into Jamboard, you can choose, it's maybe easier to use the highlighter tool up at the top. You can pick the tool and switch over to the highlighter tool and just make a small circle by the one of these 7 changes that you think matter most to your Akanga. What matters most to your students? So switching over to the Jamboard and putting a mark in there. Just picking one of the 7, reading the 7. Oh, nice. People are starting to do it. Stop sharing. We'll look at that real quick. You don't have to make a big circle. You guys are doing nice jobs. I was thinking little tiny circles for voting because it's hard to tell. You're mixing them all together, but people are giving me ticks and X's, I can see. So strengthening numeracy and literacy is coming up strongly. That matters a lot to our students, and it does. It mattered a lot to employers. And that was one of the things that people said, the current system's just not performing well. We're putting students out with NCEA who don't have good numeracy and literacy. Mana orite mote Mātauranga Māori, equally valuing of Maori knowledge, really getting a thinking around the sense that we have a Pākehā system that we've developed, and we need to look at that and say, how can we equally value Mātauranga Māori? Making NCEA more accessible, we want every student to have access to that. Have fewer, larger standards. The fewer, so students don't have that stress, to reduce down on the amount of stress. The larger to, again, so you can get enough material. That coherence was one of the key things. Showing clear pathways. We have a great pathways team looking at making sure that we can see where students are going with this. And almost none of you guys, nobody voted for 7, keeping NCEA as an optional level. That was really important to some. Whānau, people found it really important. They wanted that option for their kids, but we can see what matters most to you based on how you're voting here. If you enjoy playing with Jamboard, there is a second slide there. I'll come back to that later in the talk if you wanted to go on and have a play with it. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go back to the talk. Oh, nope, come on. There we go. So the changes are really about those principles. So hopefully that answers these questions that people asked about what mattered.
Sorry, Cami, we can't see your screen just yet. It's not sharing.
Thank you so much. Good call. Is it sharing now? It's trying to get back in there. Yep. Oh, it's sharing a weird version of my screen. There, it's gonna switch and show the whole thing there. Okay. Thank you. So those questions that were asked about the changes, it's about those principles and those 7 changes that came out of that. And it's a big nationwide change. The next questions that people asked were around numeracy and literacy, which is the one you said was the number 1 that seemed to matter the most to your students. So numeracy literacy is changing into a co-requisite. It's based on common assessment activity. There's going to be 2 times that it will be delivered next year in 2022. And that's going to be at the end of term 2 and the end of term 3. Next year is the big pilot year. This year there was a mini pilot. Next year will be a big pilot. And any school that wants to can participate in that. And I'll tell you about that in a second. And students should only be sitting those assessments, those common assessment activities, when they're ready. And they can do that at any point. So the teachers, the school is deciding that their student is ready, and then they're taking those assessments at the time they're there. So thinking of it a little bit like the driver's license. Why do we call it numeracy instead of mathematics and statistics? You can think of numeracy sitting inside mathematics and statistics. Numeracy is the interweaving of mathematics and statistics content ideas in context. So it's really putting it to use. It's curriculum level 4 or 5, so it's not the same as what we're doing at NCEA level 1, which is curriculum level 6, the lower level of the curriculum. By the way, as I'm passing by the slide that has more on it than what I'm saying, I'm not going to be able to say everything on all these slides, but you will have access to them later if there's information you want to go back and have access to. key message I want to get across is that all teachers are teachers of literacy. In the schools where I taught, we always had PD around how the maths and stats teachers needed to think about the literacy of our students. We needed to make sure students were literate and successful in our courses. So all teachers are teachers of literacy. We also need to think all teachers are teachers of numeracy. Numeracy comes up in all the subjects, comes up in lots of places, and all teachers need to be teaching numeracy. So it's not just the job of the maths and stats department. We do have that localized curriculum, and you know your learners best. So we encourage the literacy and numeracy skills to be embedded across the curriculum. That would be how we would think would best work with it. And the ministry is going to provide you resources, guidance on how best to do that. And that stuff will be coming out in the start of 2022. So if you want to be part of the pilot, Robin, if you'll post this email into the chat, that email is LN. Sometimes when you see it, it looks like IN because it's a lowercase l. I capitalized it to make the point. So lnpilot@nzqa.gov.nz. You've missed their original webinar, but it was recorded, and any school can participate. So if you think your school's been told you can't participate, you probably were told that you're not a pilot for maths and stats, because that's gone down to its mini pilot. But for the big pilot for numeracy, any school can participate. So I hope there that I've answered the questions that you had around the numeracy and literacy co-recs. And the key message again probably is that it's an all school professional development. All teachers should be teaching numeracy. And maybe your school will be asking you to help guide that for your school and help teachers in other areas, but it should not be all on your shoulders. The next set of questions were around timelines and time, especially your time. How do you find time? Some of those questions I can't exactly answer, but I'll answer the ones I can. So the rephasing here, the level 1 of the curriculum, we worked this year. That's hopefully in the teacher only days this year. You've seen the draft products, made those available, gotten feedback on that. That happened starting last year and into this year. We'll have a mini pilot in 2022, and then it'll be full pilot in 2023 and then implemented. And then just staggering from that is what's happening at level 2 and level 3. Again, the numeracy and literacy had its mini pilot this year. Next year, we'll have its full pilot, and it will be implemented starting in 2023. Also time, where do you find time to learn about all this stuff? Your union negotiated teacher only days for you. And so there's 8 of them. 1 was in 2020, 3 in 2021, 4 in 2022. Some of the key themes so far have been around numeracy and literacy, Māori, Mātauranga Māori, equity, inclusion, and pathways, and some good information provided. A lot of information. So where do you find it? Everything, the space where you go for almost anything is ncea.education.gov.nz. And there's this implementation at the top of the screen. And then under there, you can choose teacher only days. When you get into teacher only days, that takes you to the learning management system, which you sign into as a guest. And from there, you can pick that you want the resources kete, and you begin the module, and you get in there, and you start out on the main menu. And again, there's lots of resources within there. You have to click over on this top part to the resources. So the menu has a lot of stuff, but then there's more stuff in the resources, including in there. So thanks. There's a link there to that teacher only day in the chat. what you see on the screen here is that there's some maths and stats specific material around Mātauranga Māori. It got a little lost in the system there. The links are a little bit hard to follow. So I've put all of that together in a Google Drive that's easier. The links still don't quite match up. I'm hoping to get that to happen, but at least right now it's clear which PowerPoints go with which videos. So Robin, if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat. Oops. Additional help that's available for you. Subject-specific help. Robin and the other kaiarahis with the networks of expertise and NCEA have been given funding. Robin's position's ending, but there is still the nationwide networks of expertise and NCEA. So go to NCEA. They have a lot of stuff up there already. Look at their materials, use them, ask them questions, and they'll come through to us as well. Also, a lot of this initiative is happening to your whole entire school, and there should be whole school professional learning and development around it. And all teachers were given the option of taking courses through Ta'ahu o Te Ureo Māori to help improve your spoken language. And once you do that, that helps open up the whole world of Te Ao Māori. So it's quite exciting. So to the best of my ability, I answered those questions around time and timelines for what's happening. You know, working together as a team within your school. If you're at a small school and you're only a few math and stats teachers, or maybe only one, then I mean, you're finding that greater community talking through NCEA, and also looking at your whole school to help build this. The next set of questions were around the review of achievement standards. So I'd like you to take a minute. If you didn't do it on the Jamboard, I'll look and see who's done it on the Jamboard, but just on your piece of paper in front of you, just draw a Venn diagram to show how you see mathematics and statistics relating to each other. So some people might have already done that on the Jamboard. Nope, nobody drew on the Jamboard. You guys were having too much fun listening to me, which is great. Maybe not fun, you were too focused. But if you've taken a moment now and drawn a Venn diagram. Oh, somebody's getting it on the Jamboard for me. So nice, a couple people even finding the circle tools. You don't have to do it on the Jamboard, but what did you draw? Do you have something like one of those two things? Oh, I can see the person working on the Jamboard who has a third option, something closer to that, although they're doing another circle. I'm going to keep watching the Jamboard. So some people, and those people often consider themselves to be mathematicians, mathematicians view statistics as a subset of mathematics. It's one of the tools in a mathematician's toolbox. Statisticians, on the other hand, you ask them, maths is just a tool that they use to help look at their data. It's not the only tool they use. It's one of the things they use. So they see maths as a subset of statistics. At school, we're not doing either one of those two exactly. We have maths and stats overlapping with each other. And so the question was around, why do we call it maths? Why do we call it stats when they both include each other? And that's true. They do both include each other. So there is an overlap. And we think that's really important. We think it's important for students to see and to understand that mathematicians use statistics and statisticians use mathematics. And there is, each one uses some of the other one. The process of the review of achievement standards is a big one. That's why, I mean, it took over a year to develop, and it'll take that same amount of time for level 2 and level 3. So it involves the lead secondary advisor, which is Lauren Burr for Maths and Stats, the subject expert group, which is a large group of people, which included teachers, university lecturers, what else? Industry. We make sure that there's Maori representation, Pacifica representation, and that there's a variety of schools, you know, low decile, high decile, and you all meet together and discuss and think about these ideas. So it was a big process. There's a technical writer in there the whole entire time, listening in on the conversations and trying to take the important ideas from those conversations. Then at the ministry, the team is much bigger. Again, there's a whole bunch of other people who have to review everything that's done. And these people have to review what's happening in all the different achievement standard reviews in all the subjects. And they have to make sure that we're meeting those guidelines for, you know, that we're using our principles and that we're following the 7 guidelines, and they're looking to make sure that there's consistency across the process. So when you guys see stuff and think, why hasn't it changed immediately? Why wasn't there immediate response? You need to think about how big that team is that's looking at it. And then of course we have NZQA involvement through the whole entire process. They're actually sitting in along with that technical writer, listening to those discussions and inputting on those discussions through the whole entire process. But then at the end of it, it still has to go through their channels and get all their tick-offs. They produce a whole bunch of stuff that's all on ncea.education.gov.nz, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at it over the course of this year. It did change a little at the beginning of November. We put out updated versions based on all the feedback. So it is learning and taking on things from the sector, from NZQA before it gets finalized. And now it's all ready to go into the mini pilots. There was a question about TKI. TKI, the goal is that eventually TKI will get replaced just because the technology there is getting old, and everything will be available to you on ncea.education.gov.nz. So that will be the key place that will go for everything. But for now, TKI is still there. One of the key things they put out is the learning matrix for level 1, which is curriculum level 6. Level 1 at NCEA was always intended that they were credentialing curriculum level 6. And anything that you're doing now that's not credentialing level 6 is really not meeting the true purpose of the standards, which is why there's a review of the achievement standards. All right, I set my timer so I'd know when I was halfway through. So there we are, we're at the halfway point. So curriculum level 6, we have these big ideas across the top. You know, what has been missing? How do we get that coherence? One of those, again, key principles that it's all based on. That's what the big ideas are about. And then in the middle, we have that significant learning, which is what we saw as the learning that's too important to be missed. And we're really wanting people to see those connections. So there, I've tried to answer all those questions around the review of achievement standards, where that resourcing will be, and why the name changes, or why the names are what they are. The next set of questions were around assessment, something we're always thinking about. We want to look at that assessment and think, where is that taking us? So the level 1 standards, the assessments that we have, both the internals and externals, are assessing the standards. So the standards are your list of what's happening, and then the assessments assess those standards. So the externals assess the standards. So all the standards are changing. We have 4 new standards that, fewer standards that incorporate more stuff is one of the things that we're attempting to do. So Maths and Stats 1.1 is explore data using a statistical inquiry process. So there we have our statistics, and it is expanded over what we do currently on separate standards because it's trying to get really statistics and probability together into that one standard. 1.2, use mathematical methods to explore problems that relate to life in Aotearoa and the Pacific region. So we're using mathematical methods. This is how, where is this usefulness? Why am I learning this? This is doing those applications, bringing those together. But again, we're not just doing number or trig or geometry. We're wanting to pull those ideas together and help students see that they're related to each other. And it's at curriculum level 6. 1.3, interpret and apply mathematical and statistical information in context. Some people see this and say, oh, they've said stats twice. Why is stats growing? Well, this is mathematics and statistics. This isn't just a stat standard at all. And this is what all of us are facing every day. Students may not look so much at the news, but they are looking at lots of stuff online that shows them graphs and gives them information. And how are they interpreting that information? How are they using mathematical ideas about rates of change and growth and, you know, equations to help understand data that they see represented, and how do they interpret it statistically? So incorporating those two together, helping students see that both of those skills are important and come together. That external, it's externally assessed. So internally means internally assessed, externals are externally assessed. 1.3 is due to occur at the end of term 2. So it's not an exam at the end of the year, and it's not necessarily really an exam. It's a common assessment activity. And 1.4 is possibly one more exam-like. This one does occur at the end of the year, and it's demonstrate mathematical reasoning. And that one is just maths for math's sake. Maths is fun. We want to see that. Oops, sorry. And people want to know, what do these look like? What are examples? So 1.1 and 1.2, the internals, you can go on to the ncea.education.gov.nz and you can see the sample assessments. You want to know what those externals are going to look like. People from the Review of Achievement Standards team have put up examples of what they may look like on NCEA. So they worked for the Teacher Only Day to put together materials, and that's available through the NCEA website. What's going to happen at curriculum level 7? Well, that, you know, group of people have to come in. There'll be a maths group and there'll be a stats group, and they'll talk to each other, but then they're going to work separately. And the maths group is going to come up with 4 standards, 2 internally assessed, 2 externally assessed. And the stats group are going to come up with 4 standards, 2 internally assessed and 2 externally assessed. What those are going to look like, I don't know, because the groups haven't started meeting yet. And the whole idea is that there's this big process that they go through, and we can't circumvent it by, you know, pre-knowing what should happen at the end. But one of the things I do know is we're going to talk to them a lot about the fact that they do need to overlap. That we don't want any kid coming out of school with mathematics and not knowing any statistics. And likewise, you don't want anyone coming out with statistics and not knowing maths. It's really important that they are tools in each other's toolbox. So hopefully there I have answered the questions you had around assessment. The next group of questions, or what I would call local curriculum questions, about the flexibility, how the program's going to look in your school. And how is it going to look in your school? You know your students best and what will work best for them. So that is up to you to decide. What we're asking you to do is to focus on the teaching and learning. What do the students need? what do they want, and what should they be learning, and let this assessment fall out from that. There is no such thing as a required course. Students need to be at curriculum level 6 to be credentialized at NCEA level 1. So that's what NZQA is doing. It's providing a credential. NCEA level 1 is credentialing curriculum level 6. So the assessments need to be at curriculum level 6. When our group met together, because I was on that review of achievement standards group, we talked about this. And for curriculum level 6, for level 1, we said, what do we think every student should have a chance to learn before they leave school? What's too important to be missed? And that's what we built those standards around. That's what we built the learning around. So what could you do now? You can be thinking about what can you do in your junior program to prepare students for this. So when people talk about that flexibility, you do have to get students to curriculum level 6, which is past what they have to be at for that numeracy test. So you have to build them to that level. Some schools are even thinking about, possibly doing NCEA level 1 over 2 years to get students at that curriculum level 6, to acknowledge that this is maths and stats. It's really important for our students to learn and help them get there. There's so much flexibility with the NCEA and your local curriculum, but you make those choices around the teaching, the learning, and the assessment. Your school makes those choices. So what assessments your students take and which ones make up a course, that's for your school to decide. How many credits they need to proceed to the next level, that's for your school to decide. You will be given some guidelines from the universities. The New Zealand Math Society and the New Zealand Stats Society are part of this process, and they're already looking at it and talking about it, and they will be thinking what changes they'll need to make at the universities based on this. But they're the ones, really saying we're getting students in with no coherent knowledge. There's no guarantee what students will have learned if they make it through to university, and they're wanting the coherence. So we're helping to provide that. And the other thing, just thinking about course endorsement, when you're making your courses, there is course endorsement at all 3 levels. And that does require the students to take an assessment that's internally assessed and one that's externally assessed, and build up to those 13 or 14 credits. So hopefully there I have answered your questions that were around local curriculum. The next set of questions was a really good set of questions that came in about NZQA, best practices, and moderation. And so I asked NZQA and I got some responses for you, and here they are. So the best practices workshop, they're still available on request. And so in your region, you help identify who has a need and what is that need, and then you request NZQA to come and run a best practices workshop on that. And currently there's no cost. I don't know if that means they're considering a cost, but that's what he said. Currently there's no cost. And they're developing a series of online modules, and they're working on them in all areas, including maths and stats. And so here's another link that Robin has put into the chat for you guys. So the current offerings of those can be found there, and they're constantly adding to that. And they're, wanting to know if these are useful or what kind of things are useful, because they are looking at how they're going to best support the changes in the system. For moderation, there are issues. They have small word limit to get messages across, and they have to follow guidelines. Soon, or possibly already, there's a button available to give feedback about the reports. That's something your principal nominee would be able to look and see if that's available yet. Use e-submissions. If you use an e-submission, the whole process goes much better, and it enables you to have a better feedback with the moderator, including you can query a comment, which gives you a two-way dialogue with the moderator. And I was told that it works much better on the e-submission. I was also told that it's not used very much, so they encourage you to use that. You can email them directly. You can request clarification by an email, you can appeal moderation, and you can appeal an appeal. So, you know, if you're unhappy with your moderation, make sure you're going through those. I really especially encourage that query a comment. But maybe the most important thing is how NCEA and your kairahi can help you there. So they have informal channels with NCEA. So if you have questions that aren't being asked, maybe ask the kairahi and they can tell you what they've heard from other schools, because that's why it's nice to have national and regional kairahi, but also they might have an informal way to work with NZQA. So hopefully that was your NZQA questions asked and answered. The last question that I got asked is, what do I think is the most important thing to be doing to prepare for these changes? We've been given this 1 year reprieve. What do we do? I'd encourage you to think about curriculum, focusing on what's the important stuff. What do we need students to learn to be successful? And see, I'm going to have a comment about this in a second, but we don't think of that as reductionist at all. I haven't read the whole comment, but I can just kind of see part of it. And, you know, it's this big idea. There are so many big, important ideas that we just kind of skim over and don't give students enough time to really think about and apply and revisit. And that's the stuff that we want to make sure every kid has a chance to see. So, I mean, one of the #1 things I would say is the equation of a line that comes up in pretty much every discipline, and it looks different in every discipline. And, you know, whether it's AX plus BY equals C, or Y equals MX plus B, or Y equals A plus BX, you know, those are all different ways for the equation of the line to be represented in different subjects. Like one was economics and one was, you know, like different subjects represent it differently. And equation of the line becomes this really important thing in so many of them. And we don't give, you know, we just go, oh, they get it. They know how to graph a line, and we move on. And students still struggle with that as a really big concept. So one thing you might think about, if maths and stats disappeared from the curriculum, it won't. We're not disappearing it from the curriculum, but you know, if we don't make it engaging for students, they may choose not to engage with it because we're saying it's not required. So if it disappears, what are they going to miss out on? Is it just that they're going to miss the equation of line, or is there something in the thinking about all the different ways we can represent an equation of line that they're going to miss out on? Is it something about the thinking of statistics and how it will help them evaluate whether or not they should, you know, get a vaccine, or whether or not they should, you know, travel outside their local area right now? What are we teaching them that is helping them and their thinking? Why do we think this is important? So what would your students miss out on if they weren't in your classes? Think about that and design, and think about designing your curriculum around that. I encourage you to look at the learning matrix. So the big ideas are across the top, process ideas, and the knowledge ideas are down the side. I did a presentation on this earlier in the year for AMA, and where we unpack those big ideas a little more. Hononga is that idea of creating connections within everything they do. Ta iringa karero, conjecture, thinking about what patterns am I seeing, and using that, I notice, I wonder, getting that sense of wonder going all the time. Wananga, building their understanding through discussion, deep discussion. discussion with themselves, questioning why they're doing stuff, discussion with others, one or two or whole class. Representation, seeing that things can be represented many different ways. Patterns, looking for patterns in the world around us. If I had that reductionist view and thought, you know, what is mathematics and statistics to me? Mathematics and statistics to me they're the sciences of patterns. If that's what we're looking for. That's what we want students seeking and looking for. And how is it useful? You know, what kind of models can we build? What kind of problems can we solve? What are the uses? Keeping a whole country safe using both statistics and mathematical modeling. That's a huge use we've seen this year. And in the middle there, we have that significant learning that comes from the curriculum. So could you take something like this and use that for your junior school? Think about what are those big processes. Maybe it's the exact same ones for the processes and the knowledge you want to start building in your junior school, but then that significant learning will change because this is at level 6 and you want to build them up. Mātauranga Māori, Māori te mo te Mātauranga Māori is hugely important. How are you going to do that? How are you going to have context in your classroom? I'd encourage you, the AMA has just been so amazing having all these Saturdays for people to come and discuss this with teachers and get the ideas going. So I'd encourage you to go back to term 3, 2020 and look at Fania tomorrow's talk, or term 3 this year to look at Tony Trenick and Piata Allen's work, or term 4 this year where the Gisborne teacher, Jess Williams, talked with me around specifically Mātauranga Māori and maths at NCEA. So, and Jess was one of the people on the SEG. And then there's that teacher only material again that I referred to earlier that I put on the Google Drive. It is available through the teacher only day through the ministry, but a little bit hard to get a hold of all of it, but it's all there together on the Google Drive. So focus on the curriculum, focus on those big ideas, have a discussion amongst the teachers at your school to think about those. I'll answer questions. I do see that there were some questions during the talk that were popping up. I will answer those now. I'm also glad to stick around a little bit afterwards, but if you have any questions after this time, please feel free to email me. Get in contact. Let's create a relationship. Let's work on building this better together.